Welcome to the Deliberate Leader podcast. Today we are joined by the wonderful Melanie Marshall. Melanie, welcome.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to speak with you. It's been a while, so
It
thanks for
has.
having me on.
We met, we were just saying before press record that it was almost on a year ago now, and we were both part of a fabulous group of women doing their thing in the space that we both work in. But we learned a lot about each other. We had that awesome walk in Queenstown. Do you remember? It
We
was an
we
awesome
did.
walk
It
in
was good.
Queenstown.
Like a couple of
Um,
those. It was nice.
And it's so good to reconnect with you today and to really share with others some of the work that you're doing, particularly around that adaptive leadership space. But I'll properly introduce you. This is the weird bit because you're just going to have to listen to me talk about you for a bit. Pretend you're not there. But for
Okay.
everybody else, Melanie, she describes herself as a bit like a personal trainer for companies that value being fit and strong, which I love as an analogy. Melanie is a change and adaptability expert who works with leaders and teams committed to sustainable excellence. You have an interesting background as an Air Force veteran, and I remember hearing some of your stories in Queenstown, which were amazing. I'm sure some of those will make their way through our conversation today. But as an Air Force veteran with executive and operational experience across a whole range of industries, you absolutely understand complexity and pressure better than anybody probably, and what that takes to deliver, particularly in deliberate leadership. So I'm really interested and looking forward to our chat today. Melanie is a published author, coach, trainer, and facilitator. You've written your book, Trust, the Foundation for Healthy Organisations, which we'll pop a note in so people can get a copy of that. But thank you, Melanie, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Rita. And I'm already working on my second book as we speak. So, and it is very much focused on adaptability in teams and organizations. But it also starts with self-leadership as part of that, and then leading others. So I like the fact that you've pulled me back into a leadership brain for this chat, because it's always very helpful. You can have all the plans under the universe to lead a team or to lead a business, but if your own leadership is a little bit off kilter, you're not going to really be able to get anyone on board.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this second book, because trust is obviously quite a specific area and so important from a deliberate leadership perspective, and particularly because you've called it's the foundations for healthy organisations, which it absolutely is. What are your, and this is a question which I know I haven't sent you this one, but that we're going to have an organic chat, as we said. So this second book, what are you hoping are the key messages for leaders and others out of this second book?
Yeah, so the second book is more around how you build the strong foundations to be able to effectively run a business or run an organization. Because quite often when people look at teams, they think in terms of it's all about leadership, and that's a big component of it, but it's really only about a third of the picture. If you want to run a successful team and a service, it's leadership at every level. So leadership's not executive, it's every single person feels a sense of responsibility and ownership for the work that they do to get an outcome. The second part is business intelligence, which is about measuring and monitoring progress with measures where people understand that what they do actually has an impact, and they use that to make evidence-based decisions. And the third part is service flow. So you can have amazingly talented, brilliant people who are all trying to lead at every level for themselves and for the company, but if the people, the process, and the technology is all a bit clunky and it's not working for them, they can't perform at their best. So for me, adaptability is about overall performance of people, process, and tech. It's about having the right people, developing people's skills, but it's also about making sure that they have the right information and measures so that everything that they do, every effort that they put in, they can see is going to produce a solid return. And making sure that teams have the foundations for that is a very big part of it. So that's the second book, and do a lot of work with teams, but I also do a lot of work with executives and trying to bridge the gap between the two. It's very much a personal thing as a starting point, and from a leadership perspective, and that's where I guess the model sort of starts for my second book, is there are three key things. It's presence, influence, and impact.
Mm.
And if you are thinking of how you present in the world, be it your energy, the way that you carry yourself, your own self-worth, that is then going to have a positive influence around the people around you, because you're going to be respectful of their presence, their abilities, and their traits. And then the impact is, well, how do we all work together, and what are the things that we're going to do to be able to get a meaningful outcome?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of how it sort of pulls together,
Yeah.
and that's how I sort of bridge the gap between executives who are wanting to do a really great job, but also the teams equally wanting to do a good job as well, and bringing them together.
Yeah. In your a comment just at the start of this, you referenced self-awareness or self-leadership. I think it was one of the two, but I think that's it. It absolutely plays such a role in that presence, influence, and impact. Tell us
Mm.
a little bit more about, and I'm not sure if your area of research has gone into self-awareness or not, but certainly as a fundamental to adaptability in leadership. I imagine that leaders that you're working with are going to be checking out blind spots, looking in review mirrors, hopefully looking forward a little bit. What's your take on that? Like, how important is it?
Oh, it is so important. And the funny thing about the term self-awareness is that we're never really fully self-aware, because we have our own frame of how we think we're presenting in the world, but quite often, like, we don't get to experience ourselves from the outside looking in. So self-awareness is a funny one, because it starts with, how are you feeling? What are your energy levels like? But at the same time, how is that being experienced by other people within your teams and within the workplace itself? And making sure that you are open to getting that feedback, but also accepting that it's not always going to be positive, is a really vital thing. And one of the first things that I do, whether it's working with leaders or in a more of like individuals or teams, it's to do a bit of a baseline assessment around, well, where are you at now? What are you feeling? What would you like to be focusing on? And how can we get you there? So, and I love your term deliberate leadership, because if leadership is not deliberate, what's the point?
Mm. Yeah.
Like, the whole purpose of leading is for an outcome.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what that outcome is, you become a bit of a rudderless, reactive person, just kind of flapping about.
Yeah.
And even just last week, I was speaking to somebody, and they said, you know what? And they're quite an intelligent, very successful executive, and they said to me, I'm kind of like flapping about here. Like, sort of leaning in and whispering, and that's not uncommon. And it's like, well, talk to me about why you're flapping about. And he's like, well, really reactive. We've got a lot of stuff going on, a lot of balls that are being juggled right now, and I feel like we just need to get some control, and like, around some of the chaos, and just really get a feel for what's important and what isn't, because it just all can't be urgent.
Mm.
So that's when I then do an evaluation of where the teams are at. And I've created a diagnostic it's like if a culture survey and an operational review had a baby. That's what it's like. Because
Yeah.
what I found was is that when people talk about leadership and culture, they talk about like self-awareness, emotional intelligence, how they're interacting with people, but they don't tend to then focus on, well, what's the actual operational dynamics of you doing your job each day? What are the tools that you use? What are the processes that you use to create an impact or to get an outcome? And that's where I think things start to get a bit wobbly. We look at things as either or, as opposed to the whole. So my adaptive service review is blending the business world and the leadership world together, and going, okay, well, this is the reality of what it's like to work in an organization. How can we improve the way that people deliver the job or work on the job to make things easier and better for people? And if you do that, it's also better for the customers as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's a great way to look at it. I mean, we often will look at operational objectives being met, and then we look at culture, but we know that one informs the other. So if one is out, then typically the other one is having an impact. But to look at it holistically in that view would be super valuable, I'm assuming, for lots of different
Oh,
organizations.
absolutely. It's really cool because it opens practical doors for continual improvement. And adaptability for me, it's all about embedding excellence as a quality. Uh, and I'm not talking about high performance or, burning, like to a point where you're burning people out, but I'm thinking about how can people sustainably perform with excellence? And that always takes a much more balanced view. And understanding what the employee experience of service delivery is really important. The other part of that is also asking the question of how could it be better? Like, what are the pain points in how you're delivering what you do or doing what you do each day? A little bit painful. Where can they change? What can be done differently? So it's asking very proactive, very precise questions about exactly what needs to shift. And that, I think, is the difference where in previous iterations or roles that I've had outside of my own practice, where you'll get the results of, a 360 evaluation of leaders or culture surveys, you'll see it and they'll be like, oh, we need more training, more communication, better leadership. And you go, well, they're just words. They're really vague. Let's give something a little bit more meaty and precise to work on, because then those other things will come.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that baseline assessment that gives us some data. It's a huge part of, that self-awareness, and I love your what you shared there around we can't really see, even though we can be the most self-aware leader, we can't really see ourselves. It's really, we've got to rely on that experience of others to give us hopefully that honest feedback. In your mind, Melanie, because you mentioned presence, influence, and impact, being critical. And so when we think about a deliberate leader, I always like to ask the question, in your mind, what are those characteristics that really set deliberate leaders apart from the rest?
Yeah, it's being excellent with care when nobody is looking.
Yeah, yeah,
That's how I define it.
yeah,
Yeah, because if everybody's looking, and that's what you care about, you're just sort of show ponying.
yeah,
If you are really focused on not just doing excellent, but being excellent within yourself, being a master of and being the best that you can possibly be and doing the work when nobody's looking, but you're doing it with care, that's got to come out at some point. It's
mm,
good for you as a person within yourself because you're always bettering who you are and who you want to become in the world. But it also then encourages other people to do the same. And I think there's a real thing where when you hear, oh, leaders, we have to empower people, I just kind of go, that's a bit BS in
yeah,
my book. I actually think it's about providing the support and the space and the encouragement for people to empower themselves. And
yeah.
that is far more powerful to me. That's what like real leaders do. It's
Yeah.
not about them.
And it's got a whole lot of care entwined in that. Because when you're talking about
Oh,
that space
yeah.
and encouragement, and I guess then the action on the leader is it's to create the space versus to empower. Like we're not injecting the person with some power, but we're actually creating that space so they can feel that themselves and generate it actually from within.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that generally speaking, we're motivated by two things: connection and purpose. And
Mm,
when we as humans have those things, we can't go wrong. And having care also means setting really nice, clear boundaries.
yeah.
Boundaries for yourself, helping other people set boundaries that are healthy and realistic. And support is enabling people to perform to the best of their ability, whatever that ability happens to be, and being very realistic about that, not just when they're doing well, but also when things aren't going to plan or when things aren't being delivered the way that they need to. So care is also wrapped up with accountability
Mm.
because we want to deliver on our value, right? So yeah.
You talked so obviously with that theme of adaptability, and then I'm keen to, if you're happy to share any examples from your time in the Air Force. So I imagine, you mentioned before, when we were introducing the concept of the deliberate leader in this conversation, I think I heard you say kind of, what's the point? Like, as if you're not deliberate, you're directionless, rudderless. I think you said, what's the point? And I think adaptability is a core skill set for a deliberate leader, because it's about knowing when to switch it up, when to change, but not being, I think the term you used before is really flapping about, and not being kind of not changing to every single whim, but really strategically paying attention to, well, what needs a bit of a change approach here. In your time, Melanie, in the Air Force, I imagine that you saw so many different examples of deliberate leadership, but then also when leaders needed to be adaptable and kind of change their style. Is there a standout example for you, or something memorable for you that stands out around leaders that you might have had in that forum and in that part of your life, where they demonstrated that adaptability, but also that strength?
Look, interestingly, it's been I've been out of the military longer than I've been in, and there are things that I've taken with me. And I think the thing that I got from the being in the military was the discipline. The discipline to do the work, even though there were times where you absolutely hated it because you were very focused on getting to a particular outcome. There was also discipline around doing preventative work to mitigate potential risks or issues that might happen. So there was a level of both operational and strategic thinking in the military that you had to sort of almost turn your brain very, very quickly between the two. So that was what I learned from the military. With respect to specific examples of where I've seen more adaptability within workplaces, interestingly, hospitals is where I've seen that the most. People talk a lot about, military leadership. There are pros and cons of military leadership. I left predominantly because I found that style too rigid, and in some scenarios not adaptive enough. In a civilian context, where I really kind of honed my adaptability skills was within a busy public hospital, where I saw examples of absolute chaos and reactivity, where everybody was flapping about. But then I also saw scenarios of absolute calm and measured approaches despite the chaos that was happening around them. So I would say that from an adaptability perspective, where I think it's of most use is that adaptability allows you to go with the flow a little bit more. It doesn't mean that you are going to be, just letting everything occur, but it's about creating a framework or a structure of which you have some wriggle room around. So if you think in terms of constraints, a soft constraint, a hard constraint, knowing what they are, creating frameworks or models for which people can use as guides to be able to work with, because every scenario, every context is different. No day is identical, and that works for both a military, a hospital, or a standard corporate environment. So for me, it's about not being too rigid, but still setting enough boundaries of which you can operate within that provides safety and quality. The other one is about testing and adjusting. That is definitely something that stuck with me from the military. So although I wasn't like a top shot with a rifle, when you learn to shoot, you zero in on a target, and you do an activity where you take a couple of test shots and you test and adjust in order to zero the rifle in so that you're more accurate with your shooting. That applies, I think, in every context, where we are always testing and adjusting what we're doing, our behaviours, our thinking, our actions. We're frequently getting feedback on a daily basis where we can either ignore it or we can take some of that feedback on and go, okay, ooh, I took a shot, didn't quite didn't quite work with that person or in that context. I'm just going to test or slightly adjust it to
Yeah.
this, and I'm going to try again and see if that kind of hits the mark. So if nothing from the military, I took the whole test and adjust concept. From hospitals, that's where the complexity really kind of hit me around how adaptable you truly need to be, because they are life and death situations every day. It's not like peacetime, wartime. It's every day is a life and death decision for somebody. And you've got multiple disciplines and lots of things, lots of moving pieces. So understanding where you are in the system, but then also how you can work with the system is pretty vital. And I use those same approaches now when I'm working with leaders and teams. What can you control? What's outside of your control? And how can we test and adjust and iteratively develop what you need so that you can maintain a sustainable, healthy level of performance for a culture of excellence?
Yeah, particularly, I mean, health is an area that's near and dear to me, having worked so much in hospitals. And I think there it's hard because I think even the military, but in health too, and any profession really where you require that precision and that
Mm.
accuracy, it can bring about, and it does tend to attract those with personalities that lend themselves to perfectionism, and we want that. Because if someone's drilling into our skull, or if someone's about to put a rod in a leg, or remove
Mm-hmm.
something, or add something, you want that precision, without a
Yep.
doubt. But it can bring about behaviors that, and that shadow side of almost that perfectionism, where you want it to be right, but there's also then that downside. And then when I think about that deliberate leadership, because you're making a choice, for me, it's that you're making a choice
Mm-hmm.
to lead every day. You're leading with
Mm.
intentionality and purpose. And, there are going to be some days where you're feeling it more than others, around
Mm.
leadership. So in the research that you've done and in those leaders that you work with, those that choose to adopt adaptability into their leadership, how does that work when they're a bit more of a perfectionist and kind of that A-type personality that's got to get it done, all the time, the first time?
I I am giggling as you say this, Rita, because I am a reforming perfectionist.
I promise that
Hence,
was the plan.
hence, no, it was not planned. That's why I'm chuckling. Hence why I'm so focused on adaptability, because it's not about perfectionism. It's about recognizing what you can and can't control. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned throughout my career, and I constantly get reminded from time to time when I slip slip up, is what is good enough? What is fit for purpose? And how much effort is required to get to the outcome. The other one is you can't care more about the thing, whatever the thing is, than the people who are working alongside you or the people that you're working for are going to give that to. Because if you care more, that's just, you're going to get into a point where you're just going to start getting a little bit insane and driving everybody else nuts. So being very clear around what is fit for purpose, what is the outcome, and what is good enough without overcooking something is very, very important. And that's not just from an ROI perspective, because you don't want to invest more than is needed. Otherwise, you're just wasting time, energy, and effort and money. Also, too, it's about your own energy. There's no point pouring energy into something that's no longer needed when that energy could be redirected into another higher value opportunity or an alternative avenue to improve something else. And yeah, if you continue down the perfectionist path, you're going to get to a point where you're going to be so burnt out that you're not even going to be delivering on the basics. So being very mindful of where your energies are at, what are your frustrations, and then realistically pulling back and going, hang on a sec, what is optimal as opposed to what is enough to get the gain, and really it's about two things. We're either doing something to remove pain or get a gain.
Mm.
And if you've removed the pain, great, stop. Now what's the gain? If you
Mm.
get the gain, stop. What's next? What's the next gain?
Yeah,
So that's sort of how I look at things now. And one of the most powerful questions I was ever asked when I was at my darkest depths of perfectionistic
Mhm.
despair was another coach asked me, they said, Melanie, what is perfect? And I got so angry at this guy. I'm thinking, how dare they question my integrity and my, insert all of the positive things that perfectionists say about why being perfect is so important. And then I burst into tears because I realized that I couldn't define it.
Yeah.
I could not define the thing that I was just, everything was important in my life was about, well, it just has to be perfect. And when I couldn't define that, I knew that I was totally stuffed because he said, how do you know if you're ever going to get there? He said, you could be perfect right now and be totally oblivious to it. Oh, and it did. It just totally took the wind out of my sails. And the second question that he asked me was, well, what can you define? And as soon as he said that, I said, well, I can define excellent. I know what excellence looks like, and I'm going to work for that. And since then, I've taken that type of questioning and that type of approach into all of the interactions and all of the work that I do with my clients, because high performers are driven by an underlying current of perfectionism. Um, the more polite word around it is mastery. And we talk very much about, there's a light and dark side of mastery. I'm all about mastery, but not mastery to the point where you're going to, be so damn hard on yourself
Mm.
that you can't see or accept that you are constantly a work in progress. You are never going to get there. That is actually the point of mastery.
Mm.
The point of mastery is that you're never going to get there. So if you can't accept that, don't bother going for it.
Sobering.
I'm a little bit lower down.
It's sobering though, because you think, here I am, whether it's a leadership path or in any other profession, whatever your life's work is. And when you're giving it absolutely everything you've got, then to know that there's inherent adaptability built into it, so you're constantly a work in progress. I love that. Remove the pain, get the gain. That is awesome. I'm going to absolutely remove that. I've written it down a bunch with a long list of other things that I've been taking notes on, because that is effectively what we're trying to do. And what that, even when you get the gain, it's, well, how much further can I push? But what I love about that is that you're pushing against your own standard where you want to go. And so when your coach framed the question, what a moment, right? Like, I'm kind of getting that feeling as you describe it, because it's not about what perfect is for anybody else or against any other person's standard. It's about what it is for you. And you
Yeah,
get to control that to some extent. You get to adapt, you get to change it and shift it,
yeah,
which brings
yeah.
about a
It's
level of freedom.
yeah, and that's what it is, right? It's freedom to know. Well, you know what? I'm gonna have the freedom to be totally adaptable. I can still aim for excellence and be adaptive in that. I can
Yeah.
still aim for mastery because that is part of being adaptable. It's accepting that there's no end point. It's a continuum of development and improvement for what you want as good,
Mm.
and that's more than enough to focus on without going totally crazy. And if you can define it and if you can measure it, you can definitely be that.
Yeah.
And those goalposts are up to you, that you can change every time that you level up. So I think in terms of, we're all in this game of life and we're all leveling up each and every day. Some of us level up faster than others. Some choose not to level up at all, and that's okay. If they're happy and if that's their bliss, not a problem. But yeah, you can't level up without some acceptance of there's always going to be a little bit more work to do, and that's okay.
Mm. Yeah. So I guess with that, and it is quite sobering to know that if mastery is great, but also not to let it inhibit you. So we're chasing for this thing that's elusive that we're never going to reach. I guess with that in mind, in your mind, what are the best strategies for leaders that are wanting to be more deliberate in how they lead, and absolutely bringing that adaptability piece, because I think it's fundamental to it. But what would you say are some strategies that leaders could leverage to help them be more deliberate?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it comes back to my basic model of adaptive leadership, and this is leadership of yourself. It's supporting other people lead in their own light or in their own brilliance, and it's about presence in the first instance. What type of energy do you want? Who do you want to be in the world? How do you want to be? How do you want to carry yourself? How do you want to feel? Presence is a really big one because we see it and feel it when we meet people all the time. You know, what type of presence do we want for ourselves that we're going to project out into the world? If your energy's flat, well, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to hang out with that. You don't want to hang out with that, right? So, what type of energy do you want for yourself and to shine out? So that's one thing, and there's a lot of self-care stuff in that, from looking after your health, your own well-being, getting your mind and your brain clear around what you can and can't do. The second one is influence. So who is it that I want to be connecting with or working with? Because we're not islands of one. Our whole worlds involve other people, and if we can't influence other people in a positive way, we're never ever really going to achieve the things that we'd like to achieve. And that comes down to your purpose. You're not going to achieve your purpose if you're only ever focusing on yourself. So how do you want to influence is really about working with other people and connecting with other people. And then the third part is impact. So for what purpose? What purpose am I going to work on myself, care for myself, make decisions around who I do or don't work with or connect with? What I will or won't do in order to like level up in my life or level up at work. Because if it doesn't have some kind of a measurable return on that investment that you're going to make, once again, what's the point? What is driving that? And knowing what that impact is going to be is very much about measuring, so that you know that when you've gotten to that next level, you can either decide to stay at that as your happy forever place, or you can decide that actually now that I've done this, I want even more impact, and then the next level looks like this. So it allows you something to aim for so that you can continue to grow into your purpose and expand your purpose over time as you start experiencing more things and learning more things.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
presence, influence, impact. If you can keep those three things on balance, it's like a three-legged stool.
Yeah.
If you can keep those in balance, you're pretty much going to be in a good space, not just for yourself, but also for the people and the things that you care about.
Yeah, that's great. I think with those three things, and they're such strong fundamentals. You know, you describe as the legs of the stool, and they're strong fundamental pieces for deliberate leadership. I love that today, you know, we've been able to go into self-awareness and that, you know, the downside, I guess, of perfectionism. And I love that you've been able to bring some of your examples in from your background, but also some other ones, you know, where we do see that tension sometimes between perfectionism, but getting in the way of creating that room for movement and learning, which is that adaptable piece. Melanie, I know you've got your second book will be released at some point. Let us know when that's all ready, because I'd love to have you back to have a more in-depth conversation with that. But in the meantime, if you want to check out Melanie's other work, the book is Trust the Foundations for Healthy Organizations. It's melaniemarshall.com.au. We'll pop that in the show notes so people can go and check out your work. But I really appreciated having this kind of conversation with you today and learning more about your area of thought leadership. So thank you, Melanie.
Thank you for having me, Rita, and thank you for sharing me with your audience. It's been an absolute joy.
Thank you. Look forward to our chat next time.
See ya.